Right. Hello again. This is Joel with Painted Green. Watching a video right now, and I'm going to actually explain to you what you are seeing. So this wall that I'm standing next to had a 90s carpet wallpaper wall. And if you have ever had to pull that off, you know that they use the same glue that they use on floor tiles. So it's like a trowel of glue that they put on the wall. And when they do that, it's real thick. So you got areas that are about 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch thick of glue, and you can scrape on that all day long, but you're never going to get it off. So we actually went through and floated the wall. So I have some drywall topping, which is the thinner drywall, and I have done one coat, as you can see up there, and just a quick run through of mud. But before I did all that, I went through with some tape, and I taped off the drop ceiling, and then there's that counter there, so I taped that off just so I don't get mud on a bunch of places it's not supposed to be. So that's what I started with, and in this part right here, you can see that the mud is dried for about 24-ish hours, and I'm going through and I'm sanding down all the edges of my mud. Those areas tend to get really thick really fast, just because you got to go around these edges and the mud will kind of pile up. So I'm sanding around a wall socket, and then I'm going up and I'm standing against the ceiling. This is just to smooth out and ensure that everything is as flat as it can be. It's not going to be perfectly flat yet. But I'm using a sanding sponge to go around the edges, just a light, pretty much used up sanding sponge, just to kind of, so I don't burn too deep into the drywall. And when you do that, you really want to make sure that if you are sanding and you start seeing huge gouges of lines from the sandpaper, you got too heavy of a piece. So you just want to bring it down to a used up piece of sandpaper. You can pretty much use any piece as long as it's really used up. You can use 120, you can even use 80 if it's been used up pretty well. I switched over to a sanding pole, and this is just to do the main big area. I believe that's a 120 grit sandpaper on that sanding pole. And I'm just giving it all a once over, and you can feel it with your when you're sanding. You can actually feel it. The grind when you first start is pretty rough, and as it starts smoothing up, you can actually feel it swishing in your hands a lot easier, and that's how you know that area is pretty good. Now on that far side that I'm at, I didn't float all the way out to the wall because there was no need to it. So I actually did what we call feathering. I feathered the mud out about 2 feet past the area that I needed, and I'm going to sand on that just a little bit harder than anywhere else, just so it floats into the wall that's got all the mud. I'm going to re-top up on some of this topping, and I'm going to go through with that, and we're going to do a whole nother second coat of mud. So when we do the second coat of mud, you don't necessarily need to put it on super thick. Well, we already switched over, so we didn't get it. But you just want to do a nice smooth application. Make sure you don't have any huge lines. What we call hitchhikers is when you get a dry piece of mud stuck in your wet mud and you slide it across the wall and it makes a nice line. We want to make sure all those are out. So at this part, it's been another 24 hours since that mud has been on there. Because it's got so much mud on it, you don't want to rush it. You want it to dry, because if it's dry on the surface but not underneath, you will end up sanding, and the pressure of you sanding will push the mud in, and now you got a big divot you got to fill up. But as you can tell on the wall where I'm at right now, you can actually see that I floated out, and a lot of those blotchy spots from the last mud have disappeared. So that's the feathering technique. And I went through, and now I'm just doing a light sand on all of it again with the same exact 120 grit sandpaper. Certain areas I find I'll even go through with my hand and hand sand with another sanding block, again a used up piece, just so I'm not burning through. Feathering around the wall socket and feathering out my my end piece to float it into the wall. So we're just going to give that a good once over. It's really dusty, it's really dirty. Be prepared to have dust everywhere. You can even see it pluming around me right now. My hands are even turning white. A lot of sanding. There's a lot of sanding to this. There's no easy way about it. You can't just rush it. If you rush it, you're either going to have high and low spots. You're going to have lines. If you sand too hard, you're going to have drag marks from the sandpaper all over it. So you just got to really take your time. And I'm actually went through the sanding pole on this time and realized I didn't like the way it was looking, so I'm now doing it all by hand with a used up. I think it's actually I don't even think it's a used up. I think it's a brand new 320 sandpaper sponge. And I'm just going around making sure every edge is hit. I even got 2 pieces in my hand, just feeling it. I feel it with my hand. If it feels kind of rough, I hit it again. And it looks like now I'm actually going to be cleaning up my drywall dust. It goes everywhere. So just be prepared to have dust on everything. Look at all that dust. Oof. But it's the only way to get it done. So I'm going to clean it all up. Found a little bit more spots. See, as you clean and go, you just want to make sure you're looking, because I found more. So I'm sanding a little bit more. Make sure I get the smoothest wall possible. Look at that. Look at how much more I found. It's nice to actually stand back, take a look at your job to make sure you're actually getting everything as perfect as you can get it. Now, we're not perfect, but we try to be. So at this point now, what I'm doing is I'm actually getting set up with some primer. Now the walls are going to go a gray color. So we actually had taken the wall color and got it matched but diluted by 50%. So it's not actually as dark as it's going to go. But it's good enough to do a first coat. So with drywall mud, you can't just do one coat. So I'm doing the primer coat right now, and that's going to soak so deep into the mud, it's going to just make it harder than snot. This is something you have to do. If you decide that you want to paint your wall, you can use the color. You don't have to use a primer. You can just use the paint that you bought, but just know you're going to have to do 2 or 3 coats, depending on the color and how it turns out. So this is my dad here telling me the wall looks great. And as I'm working on her, I'm cutting it all in right now. I do know that I have the tape on the ceiling from when I just first started mudding. I also have the tape and paper down on the counter. So with this application of paint, I'm just kind of slopping it on there because I know I'm protected. I'm not going to paint the whole wall. I'm just going to paint all of the bare drywall. So when we're cutting it, we want to make sure that we keep going back over our brush to make sure we get a smooth line, not a bunch of ropes as we call it with our brushes where you brush and you leave brush lines. You want to make sure you float it out at the end. I'm rolling this wall now with drywall mud. When you roll, you want to get it on real thick just so you have a good amount of paint on it. But you don't want to just slap a bunch of roller marks everywhere. So in this process, you can actually see I'm literally dipping and doing about 3 rows, and then I'm going right back over it and going up, down, up, down, up, down in the same spot. That way, when you look at it when it's dry, you don't see a checkered or a zigzag pattern when it dries. You're going to see just straight up and down, and that's going to hide a lot of flaws when you roll. See, I keep going back over everything that I did to make sure it's a nice straight line. You got to pick a boogie out of the wall. Sometimes you get that drywall dust stuck on your in your roller, and it'll create a what we call a boogie, and you got to pull the booger out. That way your wall looks nice and smooth. So I hit all the drywall mud, and now I believe it's actually dry. Yep, it is. So now what I'm doing is, instead of using some topping mud, I'm actually going through with some spackle, some lightweight spackle. And I have my drywall mud tools, and I'm actually just hitting with the paint on there, you can actually start seeing a lot of the flaws. That's why it's always good to paint one coat and then do what I'm doing right now. I'm going back over with some lightweight spackle, which dries really quick but fills in. So you can almost see it. I'm almost putting nothing on there. But you can see where the low spots were, where the white spots are showing. That's all a low spot that I couldn't see until I got paint on it. So get the paint on there, get it nice and dry, and then you want to go over your whole wall again and make sure that you got all your highs and lows filled in. Especially around the edges where your tape lines are. Those seem to be the edges that get missed. Not on purpose, just because mainly people are focusing on the middle of the wall. And again, I'm going out towards the edge, even where I floated and wanted to feather in the wall. I'm going to go all the way out past that, almost past it, just to make sure everything is floated together perfectly. See, I even go past the paint, just to make sure. It's a long process. Yep. Found some good music, I guess. You could tell I'm going back over spots that I already hit, just to make sure. You want a smooth wall, it takes time. It takes a little patience, and you have to do the process, or the outcome will not be a smooth wall. I mean, anybody could throw some mud on a wall, sand it, and say that's good. But in this situation, you have all that rough glue that they use to stick the carpet on, because carpet's heavy, it would fall, so they had to put a lot of glue on. Well, I ended up probably putting about just over a 1/4 inch worth of mud on the wall. So, I mean, that's a lot of mud, and it's going to leave a lot of highs and lows. So I just want to make sure I'm actually hitting everything I can. And when I'm actually done with this process, there's actually a lot of spots that I missed, and that's okay, because, you know, it's a process, and process takes time. I think at this point I'm actually good. I'm cleaning up my tools now. You want to make sure you clean up your mud tools, because once it dries on there for a long time, it ain't coming off. So well, it will, but it's hard. You want to make sure you're constantly cleaning. So now I'm putting a fan on the wall, and this is basically just to get that spackle dried faster. So at this point right now, I've done another coat of paint with that diluted 50% of what color we're actually going to be putting on the wall. And that will pre-prime all of that spackle I just put on. So now you got 2 coats on the drywall mud and a coat on your spackle. So now she's ready to paint. What I'm actually doing right now is I'm going through and I'm taking down the tape that I put on the drop ceiling and the tape that I put on the counter. And there's one important thing that a lot of people don't realize: when you do mud on a wall, you're adding to it. And when you add to it, it changes the lines on that countertop, because I've added more. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to clean it all up, and then I'm going to go through with some siliconized caulking. You can buy that anywhere. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean it real good, and then I'm going to take some tape, and I'm going to tape a nice clean line across as straight as I can, and then I'm going to take the caulking. Oh, it looks like I found a spot. Oh, I found a spot on a different part of the wall. Phil and I are talking about something really cool here. I don't know exactly what it is, but we're both into it. It's something that's big and small. It's important. It's important to talk with your crew. It's important to have a good relationship. So I think what I did is I actually found some damage to the wall next to it, so I wanted to get that before I did this. So I'm taking some light tack or green tape. You can use Frog, you can use Painter's Mate. There's a bunch of different types of green paint or green tape out there. You just don't want to stick something on that's super gluey. Even Painter's white tape, I would say, is a little too sticky because you're putting it on top of that table. It's going to sit there a minute, and it's going to make it a little harder to pull off of that countertop. So what I'm doing now is I'm going through with the caulking, and I'm caulking this left side edge because it has now created a gap from my mud and the wall next to it. So I'm going to bring some caulking down and make sure that that crack is filled in. I'm going through and doing the countertop with the tape there. I'm getting it all inside of the grooves and making sure, I'm not even making sure it's 100% smooth at this second. And pull the tape off and it leaves just a slight little edge. What you do after that is you just make sure you clean up with a nice wet rag and the job's done.